Yo. Probably gonna take me a second, but Abarigani, Amani Abarigani. I'm trying to connect this to my Facebook. So if y'all could just bear with me for a second. It's gonna be a great decade. Happy new decade. Yeah, it's taking me a second, but it's okay. Peace. Okay. Foreword. African Americans are being urged not only by the traditional bastions of American power, but by many successful blacks as well to forget slavery, to forget Jim Crow, to forget about all that Africa was prior to the advent of the transatlantic slavery. In this far-sighted and thoughtful book, Joy DeGroy adds her voice to those who are telling Black Americans to pay no attention to such disastrous advice. Inasmuch as African Americans are the only Americans whose forebears were dragooned and brought here against their will and enslaved in America for nearly 3 centuries. A curiosity about our past, questions about ancestors known and unknown, and the need to know about Africa before we were torn from its breast is not only normal, but indeed is a sign of a healthy intellect, psyche, and soul. We travel many roads with Dr. DeGroy in this work, one of the most moving of which takes us to Ndebele in South Africa in 1994. Unsure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Let me know what it is. Ndebele, where we meet Ndebele children. During this visit, we gained important insights into the impact of American slavery on our culture and our soul. The contrast in the demeanor, attitudes, and personalities of Ndebele children, reared in traditional African societies grounded in African traditions and mores, shaped by their own culture on the one hand, and the children of Anvarwacht, a community of blacks first enslaved and then discarded by South white Africans, is instructive. Onverwagt, Anverwacht, however you pronounce it. You can let me know. Here, we are helped to better understand the long formative influence of American slavery and the socio-psychological dilemmas of America today, more than 100 years after slavery's official abolishment. Dr. DeGroy's essential thesis is that slavery, the most brutal and lucrative of American institutions, is a historical watershed event regarding which Black Americans would be loathed and dangerously ill-served to soften memory, but toward which they should indeed purposefully stride as an era of rigorous study and research. This is essential for us to better understand and master the facts surrounding slavery as a many tentacle institution. It is only through an appreciation of the full reality of American slavery that Black Americans will understand, first, the enormity of the crime, and secondly, that as descendants of the enslaved, we have nothing to be ashamed of. American slavery was the economic cornerstone on which American wealth and power were built. Wealth and power was last to this day as do the psycho-social consequences of American slavery, both for the descendants of the enslaved as well as the descendants of the enslavers. Dr. DeGroy helps us to understand the multifaceted impact of slavery on Black life, how we relate to the world, as well as how we relate to each other. Most important, this work, Joy DeGroy urges us to know and embrace our past in all its fullness, for therein lies our only hope for a healthy, self-affirming present and future. That was by Randall Robinson. Here's the prologue. Kasserine and Gera, and how are the children? Amongst the most accomplished and fabled tribes in Africa, no tribe is considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai, Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors, Kasserine and Gera, one would always say to another. It means, and how are the children? It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that the Maasai always place on children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would give the traditional answer, all the children are well, meaning that peace and safety prevail, and the priorities of protecting the young and the powerless are in place. That Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibilities. All the children are well means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles of existence, even among a poor people, do not preclude proper caring for its young. I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with the same daily question, and how are the children? I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it will begin to make a difference in the reality of how children are thought of or cared for in this country. I wonder if we could truly say without any hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well. Excerpted from a speech by the Reverend Dr. Patrick T. O'Neill of the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church in Framingham, Massachusetts. So how are the children? Throughout recorded history, people have subjugated, enslaved, and at times even exterminated one another. Sometimes these acts were committed in the name of a king or queen. Other times in the name of a tribe or country. Often they were committed in the name of God. Always they were done to consolidate and expand the power of a select few. Always vast numbers of people died for no good reason. Always, even a greater number of people needlessly suffered to sate the appetites, S-A-T-E, the appetites of the select group. These are crimes against humanity, and these crimes continue to be executed across our planet to this day. Furthermore, these crimes are perpetrated in a seemingly never-ending cycle. The powerful oppress the lesser powerful, who in turn oppress those even less powerful than they. These cycles of oppressions leave scars on the victims and victors alike, scars that embed themselves in our collective psyches and are passed down through generations, robbing us of our humanity. For who can be truly human under the weight of oppression that condemns them to a life of torment, robs them of a future, and saps their free will? Moreover, who can become truly human when they gain so much from the pain and suffering of those whom they oppress and or take advantage of? Many say these conditions are part and parcel of the human condition. Perhaps they are, but every so often, a Gandhi or Mandela graces our planet. A Gandhi or Mandela graces our planet and helps their people break the cycle for a time. The time has now come to follow their lead, break the cycle, and once again claim our humanity. Breaking the cycle and claiming our humanity will require much work from all of us. Those who have been the victims of years, decades, and centuries of oppression first must heal from injuries received firsthand, as well as those passed down through the ages. Those who have been the perpetrators of the unspeakable crimes and those who continue to benefit from those crimes have to consistently and honestly confront their deeds and heal from the psychic wounds that come with being the cause and beneficiaries of such great pain and suffering. The work to be done is particular to each cultural group, whether that group's culture arose somewhere in Africa, Europe, the Americas, Asia, or the Pacific Islands, and whether that group's members were victims, perpetrators, or both. The nature of this work is such that each group first must see to their own healing because no group can do another's work. With this understanding, I've dedicated my life to helping the children of the African diaspora, particularly those whose history is wrapped up in the history of America. No, all the children are not well yet, but yes, they can be. Introduction. Return and get it. We must return and claim our past in order to move forward, in order to move toward our future. It is an understanding who we were that will free us to embrace who we now are, the meaning of Sankofa. In the summer of 1994, my sister, my niece, and I were among 9 African American women who traveled to Southern Africa together. Upon my return, I found it difficult to adjust to being back in Portland, Oregon, a city once touted as being the whitest city in America. My 6-week journey through Southern Africa had left an indelible mark on my heart and soul. I sat in my living room reminiscing about the villages in Lesotho, the sweetness of the children, their level of generosity, and their well-mannered behavior. We were always treated kindly and offered food and drink, even when there was barely enough for one person, let alone guests. This reminded me of how my mother always used to feed what seemed to be the whole neighborhood. She had taught my brothers, my sister, and I that there was always enough food to share. Now, I was back home trying to reacclimate to my daily routines. My difficulty achieving this caused considerable concern among some of the women who were on the trip. They had begun calling my sister asking, "Has Joy left the house yet?" My many years as a mental health clinician at least assured me that I wasn't nuts. I simply needed time to adjust to having been in a place where, for the first time, it felt perfectly normal to be Black. It felt odd returning to America, to a place where being Black is frequently a life sentence or cultural isolation and social invisibility. My reminiscing was abruptly cut short when my 9-year-old stepdaughter came racing into the room. She was out of breath and quite panicked about a situation that was happening outside in front of the house. There's a boy outside who's threatening to beat up Nadine, her stepbrother, and he says he's going to pee on our car too, she said as she tried to catch her breath. Well, I was finally going to have to get out of the house. I walked out to a scene of several young Black boys standing in the middle of the street. They looked to be around 10 or 11. They were facing my son, who stood alone. I identified the boy standing directly in front of my son as the instigator and asked, "Is there something that my son has done to you that you would like to tell me about?" The young, rather stout and angry little boy responded, "What? What he's staring at?" "Excuse me," I said. "What did you say?" And the boy repeated, "I want to know what he's staring at. Does he got some kind of eyeball problem?" I was a little startled, but I managed to ask, "Are you saying to me that you want to beat my son into the ground because he was looking at you?" The young man seemed a bit uneasy with my question, hesitated, and responded, "Yeah, what do you think he's looking at?" I paused for a moment, considering what he had said, and then responded, "My son may have been looking at you because he thought you might want to play some basketball. In front of our house, we have a hoop. He may have been looking at you because he was thinking of asking if you'd like to play one of his video games in the house. He could have been looking at you because he thought that maybe you might want to walk down the street to the park. The little boy looked to be rather overwhelmed by my statements, as if to say, whoa, lady, it's not that deep. I eventually managed to settle things down by giving the boys my canned spiel, explaining how important it is for African Americans living in the hood not to fight and keep each other safe. He seemed to buy it enough to agree not to beat up my son much. He seemed to buy it enough not to He seemed to buy it enough to agree not to beat up my son, much to Nadim's relief. After the boys walked away, it dawned on me that there was a stark contrast between this experience and those in Southern Africa, where the young African males greeted each other with the common phrase, I see you. I couldn't help feeling the emotional distance that separated the two statements, the friendly acknowledgement, I see you, and the angry menacing, what you looking at? The gap between Africans and African Americans was suddenly stark and clear. Somewhere along the way, African American children have become so emotionally fragile that they cannot often withstand the implications associated with a simple gaze. I went back inside and continued thinking about what had just happened. As I sat in my living room, I recalled other incidents that at the time I had thought to be nothing out of the ordinary. In considering how we as humans arrive at our self-concept or self-esteem, this statement sums up the role that significant others play in our sense of worth. I am not who I think I am, and I am not who you think I am. I am who I think that you think I am. What has happened to this little boy's ego integrity? And why was he so mad at my son, who was black like him? My belief is that the little boy does not hold the same anger toward white people because they do not know who he is, nor can they really see who he is. He was, however, mad at black people like my son, who can see the emptiness in him, his vacant esteem. His question, what you looking at, implied that whatever he thought my son was looking at was worthy of him beating Nadim bloody for it. Now, in the light of my experiences in Africa, I began to re-examine other events involving African Americans that I previously had taken for granted. I recalled being at a local school parents meeting where I overheard a conversation between two mothers. One of the mothers was black and the other was white. Their children were classmates and played sports together at school. The black mother commented on the achievements of the white mother's child, saying, your son is really coming along. The white mother responded with pride, thank you. He is quite the man. He's in the talented and gifted program here at the school, and as you know, he's playing well in Little League. He has really excelled this year. He's just like his father. The white mother went on for some time singing the praises of her child. When she finished, she turned her attention to the black mother's child, remembering how exceptional he was, and said, your son is also doing quite well, I hear. Before she finished her statement, the black mother, who also was clearly proud of her little boy, said, oh, girl, he's such a mess at home. Sometimes I could just strangle him. Then there was the time at a local bank. When I arrived, I noticed there were lots of people in line waiting to see a teller. There was a black mother in the bank with 3 small children. The children were standing close to the mother, so close, in fact, they were actually holding on to her legs. Occasionally, one of the children would become curious about something or someone in the bank and attempt to explore the object or person. However, any effort to leave the mother's side resulted in a sharp verbal chastisement and the snap of her fingers admonishing the child to immediately get back to her side. In the same line toward the back, there was another mother standing in line waiting for an available tailor, only she was white. The white mother also had several small children, close in age to the black mother's children. The mother had her hands fully trying to stay in line while her little boy wandered about, skipping, twirling, rolling on the floor, and asking questions of the bank security guard. The white mother did not insist that her children stand by her side. Instead, she tried to keep an eye on them and apologize to the people in line whom her children were ignoring. I remember when I was a child being in the bank and other places of business with my mother and experiencing the same phenomenon of watching the white kids play while my mother insisted that I stay near her. Watching the repeat of this experience, I wondered how the little black girl who stood in the bank line felt while she watched the white boy run and play in the bank. I suspect she felt a number of emotions: fear of the consequences she might receive from disobeying her mother, shame from the curious looks of her white peers, anger at not being able to move about freely. Without explicitly saying so, the black mother sent a message to her children, and the message was, little white children can safely run and play, but you cannot because it is not okay or safe for you. These experiences teach black children that somehow this world does not belong to black boys and girls. It belongs to the little white children. Eventually, a teller came available Eventually, a teller became available and the black mother approached the counter. This was the perfect time for the little black girl to escape. She began sliding down the length of the counter, hidden from her mother's sight, because she was just small enough to fit underneath the overarching counter. It was then that the little black girl, felt free to explore, a natural tendency for children at her developmental stage, but she was faced with another dilemma. There was another black mother waiting in the line who saw her down beneath the counter, out of her mother's vision. Then the other black mother did something that is all too familiar to African American children. She gave the little attempted escapee the black mother's death stare and gestured with a slight move of her head for her to return to her mother's side. The little black girl immediately recognized the signal, looked defeated, lowered her head, and reluctantly returned to her mother's side. The proxy black mother smiled contentedly because she had successfully and non-verbally reinforced the unspoken rule that little black children cannot move about in straight. This was not a place for them to explore. Moreover, it is a world that belongs to the little white boys and girls and those like them who freely and contentedly may stroll about banks and other places of importance, oblivious to any possible restraint or limitation. On another occasion, I was one of several hundred African Americans attending a cultural recognition ceremony when I heard people commenting on someone they knew who had just received a promotion. What began as a simple compliment ended up with, the only reason she got the promotion was because the manager played ball with her father. Later on, I overheard another person seated at that table comment on how her friend recently bought a new home. Again, I heard, they can't really afford that house. Just wait and see. They're going to lose it in no time. My kids will call these people haters, folks who find it necessary to undermine the achievements of others. In a large context, African American organizations often fall victim to similar undermining behaviors. Many Black organizations, particularly nonprofit entities, experience struggles over leadership. Let's look at a familiar scenario. A small grassroots program that serves elders has been developed in the community. In this particular organization, the leadership duties have been divided among three co-founders. And like many organizations, they have been working hard to raise the few dollars that they can. They apply for and receive a sizable government grant. The money arrives with guidelines specifying the need for a single leader to be identified, closely followed by the three co-founders question, who is going to run it? Now the bitter infighting begins. Cliques form and lines are drawn within the organization. Individuals who have worked closely and harmoniously suddenly become competitors. Of course, in the end, there really is no winner. Their quality of service declines, and the divisiveness and distrust this competition engendered play into the expectation and views of the broader community. Within the neighborhood, criticisms are heard. They cannot handle it. They'll never be able to manage all that money and pull it off. Subsequently, the organization loses sight of their original purpose and in turn loses the respect of those they intend to serve. Innocent and angry, little boys threatened by a glance. Proud parents reluctant to praise their children and feeling the need to inhibit their natural exploratory instincts. Friends not being able to celebrate the success of their peers. Organizations torn asunder from within. And there's more. Parents feeling the need to protect their children from the police. Issues of skin color and hair texture continue to dominate discussions regarding beauty and physical preference. There's an excessive focus on material accumulation. People needing, wanting, and dreaming, yet fearing they will not succeed. Most of all, there is frustration. Frustration and anger, at times even rage, are feelings that seem to dominate many of our lives. If you're Black and living in America, perhaps none of this is news to you. Contemporary social scientists might offer an explanation as to why an African American boy might feel disrespected by a peer who simply looks at him. They may suggest that television, newspapers, and magazines project negative images of Black males as pitiable, ignorant, violent, and criminal, contribute to the overall poor self-image of Black boys. Black scholars might even point out the music videos and movies depicting masculine and feminine beauty, neatly wrapped in fine white features and straight hair, have further deteriorated the self-images of Black boys and girls, causing them to despise the reflection in the mirror. And they would be right. However, what is not often addressed is the role our history has played in producing these negative perceptions, images, and behaviors. We rarely look at our history to understand how Africans in America adapted their behavior over centuries in order to survive the stifling effects of chattel slavery, effects which are evident today. I believe that the behaviors in the scenarios described above, as well as many others, are in large part related to transgenerational adaptations associated with traumas past and present from slavery and ongoing oppression. I've termed this condition post-traumatic slave syndrome, or PTSS. One moment. That's where I wrong. Okay. So what is trauma? Trauma is an injury caused by an outside, usually violent force, event, or experience. We can experience this injury physically, emotionally, psychologically, and or spiritually. Traumas can upset our equilibrium and well-being. If a trauma is severe enough, it can distort our attitudes and beliefs. Such distortions often result in the dysfunctional behaviors, which can in turn produce unwanted consequences. Since even one traumatic experience can result in distorted attitudes, dysfunctional behaviors, and unwanted consequences, this pattern is magnified exponentially when a person repeatedly experiences severe trauma. And it is much worse when the traumas are caused by human beings. Recent research in the field of epigenetics has revealed that trauma can actually impact an individual's DNA, and the manifestation of the traumas experienced by prior generations can be passed along genetically to future offspring. The enslavement experience was one of continual violent attacks on mind, body, and spirit. Men, women, and children were traumatized throughout their lives, and the violent attacks during slavery persisted long after emancipation. In the face of these injuries, those traumatized adapted their attitudes and behaviors in order to simply survive, and these adaptations continue to manifest today. Post-traumatic slave syndrome examines these adaptations with an eye toward identifying today those that limit us and those that make us stronger. Now, viewed through the historical lens of slavery and its aftermath, one may better understand the hesitancy of African American mothers to acknowledge the fine qualities of their children. When we roll the scene back a few hundred years, we see a slave master walking through the fields and coming upon an enslaved woman. He approaches her and her children and remarks, "Well, now, that mirror of yours is really coming along." The mother, terrified that the slave master may see qualities in her daughter that could merit her being raped or sold, says, "Nah, sir, she ain't worth nothing. She can't work. She's stupid. She's shiftless." The mother's denigrating statements about her daughter were spoken in an effort to dissuade the slave master from molesting or selling her, and of course, no one would fault her. This behavior was nothing special. For hundreds of years, enslaved mothers and fathers have been belittling their children in an effort to protect them. Yet what originally began as an appropriate adaptation to an oppressive and dangerous environment has been transmitted down through subsequent generations. Evidence of this adaptation today is found in behaviors like those exhibited by the Black woman at the school meeting. While on the surface seemingly harmless, such behavior serves to both humiliate and injure the young Black children of today who cannot understand why their mothers and fathers, who are obviously proud of them, speak so poorly of them. All too often, these children actually begin to internalize the demeaning criticisms. Furthermore, the criticisms create feelings of being disrespected by the very people whom they love and trust the most, their parents. It is not hard to imagine the impact of these painful, vilifying remarks on the self-esteem of many Black children, especially when one considers the years of repetition. Sadly, neither the Black mother nor her children understand the historical forces that have helped to shape her behavior. With the same historical lens, one can better understand why the mother in the bank insisted that her children be near her. In the slave environment and continuing through the period known as Reconstruction, and the long night of Jim Crow, it was inherently unsafe for a Black child to stray, wander, or question white people. Such behavior could result in severe punishment or even death. Thus, Black slaves were hypervigilant about the whereabouts of their children, but such hypervigilance might have meant survival. It is equally understandable when viewed in the light of slavery why an African American might feel threatened by the accomplishments of a peer. The enslaved were divided in many different respects. Those that worked in the fields versus those that worked in the house, those that were black versus those that were black and white, and so on. Often these different designations meant access to or denial of privileges, and sometimes freedom itself. It was a common practice for slave owners to set one class of slave against the other. Slave owners perpetuated feelings of separateness and distrust by sometimes ordering black overseers to beat or punish their friends, peers, and relatives, Sambo punk ass. When a master promoted a slave, that individual often joined the master in the rank of oppressor. These are just a few examples of behaviors that have roots in slavery and have been passed down through generations. Most of them helped our chances of survival at one time or another. Some of them will inhibit our ability. Some of them will inhibit our ability to survive and thrive today if they are not brought to light, examined, and where necessary, replaced with behaviors that promote and maximize our progress. The primary purpose of this book is to encourage African Americans to view their attitudes, assumptions, and behaviors through the lens of history to gain a greater understanding of the impact that centuries of slavery and oppression have had on our lives. With this understanding, we can explore the role our history has played in the evolution of our thoughts and feelings about who and what we are, as well as our beliefs about how we are to behave. While it is true that some of this evolution has resulted in behaviors that have become both destructive and maladaptive, it is also encouraging that in spite of the oppressive conditions our ancestors endured, they were able to pass on their phenomenal powers of resilience and adaptability. It is essential that we build upon these strengths in ways that will sustain and advance future generations. In this way, we can begin the healing. Habari Gani. Amani Habari Gani. Peace.